The morning sun shone bright over London as James Morrison walked through the gates of Buckingham Palace. He wore his crisp red uniform and carried his tall black hat under his arm. James had been a royal guard for 12 years. Every morning was the same for him. He would wake up at 5 in the morning, eat his breakfast, and get ready for work. James was 34 years old and had 2 young daughters at home. Lucy was 8 years old and Sophie was 5. They always asked him about his job at the palace. "Do you really stand still all day, Daddy?" Lucy would ask. "Do you ever see the Queen?" Sophie would add with wide eyes. James would smile and tell them stories about his work, but he never told them how hard it really was. Standing still for hours was not easy. The red uniform was heavy and hot. The black hat weighed almost 2 pounds. In summer, the sun made everything worse. In winter, the cold wind cut through his clothes. But James was proud of his job. Not everyone could be a royal guard. It took years of training and perfect behavior. That Tuesday morning felt different somehow. James could not explain why. The air was warm for September. Tourists were already gathering outside the palace gates even though it was only 9 in the morning. They held cameras and phones hoping to get pictures of the guards. James reached his post outside the main gate. His partner for the day was Thomas, a younger guard who had only been there for 3 years. Thomas was nervous about everything. He always worried about making mistakes. "Morning, James," Thomas said quietly. They were not supposed to talk much while on duty, but a quick greeting was okay. "Morning," James replied. He put on his tall black hat and took his position. His rifle stood by his side. His face became like stone. This was how royal guards were supposed to look: strong, still, perfect. The tourists started taking pictures right away. James was used to this. Every day, hundreds of people took his photo. They came from all over the world. He could hear different languages around him: French, German, Spanish, Chinese, and many others. A group of American tourists stood close to the gate. "Look at them," one woman said to her husband. "They don't even blink. Are they real?" Her husband laughed. "Of course they're real, honey. But they're trained not to move. It's their job." James wanted to smile but could not. Royal guards never smiled while on duty. They never moved unless they had to. They never talked to tourists. These were the rules, and James followed them perfectly. A bus full of school children pulled up near the palace. James could see them through the corner of his eye. They were about 8 or 9 years old. Their teacher was trying to keep them in line, but children are hard to control when they are excited. "Look at the soldiers," one boy shouted. "They have such funny hats." A girl laughed. Their teacher, a kind woman with gray hair, tried to explain. "These are royal guards. They protect the Queen and the palace. They are very important people." The children pressed their faces against the bus windows. Some of them waved at James and Thomas. James wanted to wave back, but he could not. The rules were clear. More tourists arrived as the morning went on. A group from Japan took many photos. A family from India asked their teenage son to stand next to James for a picture. The boy felt nervous but did it anyway. James stood perfectly still while the family took their photos. By 11 o'clock, the area was getting crowded. This was normal for a Tuesday morning. The changing of the guard would happen at 11:30, and everyone wanted to see it. James had done this ceremony hundreds of times. He knew every step by heart. An older man from Germany approached Thomas. He spoke in broken English. "Excuse me, can you tell me what time the changing happens?" Thomas could not answer. Royal guards do not talk to tourists during duty. The man looked confused and walked away. A young woman with a baby asked James if she could take a selfie with him. James looked straight ahead and did not respond. The woman seemed disappointed but understood. She took her picture anyway and walked away with her baby. The school group from the bus was now walking around the palace area. James could see them in small groups with their teacher and parent helpers. The children were well-behaved but excited. They pointed at everything and asked many questions. One little girl with blonde hair and a bright pink jacket caught James's attention. She reminded him of his daughter Lucy. The girl was holding her mother's hand and looking up at the palace with wonder in her eyes. "Is the Queen inside right now?" the little girl asked her mother. "I don't know, sweetheart," her mother replied. "Maybe she is." James knew the Queen was not home that day, but he could not tell them. He had to stand still and silent like a statue. The morning sun got stronger. James's uniform felt heavier. Sweat ran down his back, but he could not move to wipe it away. This was part of being a royal guard. Comfort did not matter. Only duty mattered. Thomas shifted slightly beside him. James hoped his partner would not make any big mistakes. New guards sometimes fainted from the heat or moved when they should not. James remembered his own early days. He had made mistakes too, but he learned quickly. A group of teenagers tried to make James laugh. They made funny faces and told jokes. James kept his expression blank. He had seen this many times before. Tourists always tried to get a reaction from the guards. Some were polite about it. Others were not. One teenager got too close to James. A police officer nearby walked over and asked the boy to step back. The teenager looked embarrassed and rejoined his friends. The crowd was getting bigger. James could feel the energy changing. Soon the changing of the guard would begin and hundreds more people would arrive. It would be the busiest part of his day. James thought about his daughters at home. Lucy would be at school now, probably in math class. Sophie would be at kindergarten, playing with her friends. They would ask him tonight about his day at work. He would tell them about the tourists and the ceremony, but not about how tired his feet were or how hot his uniform got. Being a royal guard was his dream job, but it was also the hardest job he had ever done. Every day tested his strength and discipline. Every day he had to be perfect. There was no room for mistakes or weakness. The clock on the palace showed 11:15. In 15 minutes, the ceremony would begin. James prepared himself mentally. Soon he would march in perfect formation with the other guards. Tourists would cheer and take thousands of photos. It would be another successful day of serving the crown. James Morrison stood perfectly still, looking straight ahead, not knowing that in just a few hours, this ordinary Tuesday would become the most important day of his career. The afternoon shift began at 2 o'clock. James had eaten lunch and was back at his post. The crowd was even bigger now. Families with children filled the area around the palace gates. Street performers played music nearby. The smell of hot dogs and coffee came from food carts. Thomas had been replaced by David, another experienced guard. David was James's friend and had worked at the palace for 10 years. They often talked during their breaks about their families and life outside the palace walls. The school group from the morning was still there. James could see them sitting on the grass nearby, eating packed lunches. Their teacher was counting heads to make sure all the children were present. The little girl in the pink jacket was sharing her sandwich with a friend. A tourist bus from Australia parked near the palace. About 30 people got off the bus. They looked tired from their long trip, but excited to be in London. Their tour guide, a cheerful woman with a loud voice, began explaining the history of Buckingham Palace. This palace has 775 rooms, she told the group. The Queen uses it for official events and ceremonies. Those red guards you see are specially trained soldiers. They protect the royal family. Among the Australian tourists was a family with a young daughter. The father was tall with brown hair and wore a Sydney Olympics t-shirt. The mother had the same blonde hair as their daughter. The little girl looked about 7 years old. She wore a blue dress with white flowers and carried a small backpack shaped like a koala. "Look, Emma," the mother said to her daughter. "Those are the famous royal guards we read about in your book." Emma Patterson stared at James and David with wide eyes. She had never seen real guards before. In Australia, there were no palaces or guards in red uniforms. This was like seeing characters from a fairy tale come to life. "They look like toy soldiers, Mummy," Emma said in her sweet Australian accent. "But they're real people," her father explained. "They have important jobs protecting the palace." The tour guide gathered the Australian group closer to the gates. "Now these guards are trained never to move or speak while on duty. They stand here for 2 hours at a time. It takes great strength and discipline." Emma was fascinated. She had seen guards in movies, but these were real. She wanted to talk to them, to ask them questions about their big hats and bright red uniforms, but her parents held her hands tightly in the crowd. More tourists arrived every few minutes. A group from China took many photos. A family from Brazil asked questions in Portuguese. 2 elderly women from Scotland shared stories about visiting the palace when they were young. James noticed a young woman from Singapore in the crowd. She had her phone out and was taking videos of everything. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she was on vacation in London. Sarah loved making travel videos for her social media accounts. She wanted to capture the perfect moment with the royal guards. "The guards are so disciplined," Sarah said into her phone camera. "They haven't moved at all in the past hour. It's quite amazing to watch. The crowd kept growing. Soon, there were almost 200 people pressed around the palace gates. Parents lifted children on their shoulders for better views. Teenagers pushed to get closer. Everyone wanted the perfect photo. The Australian tour guide checked her watch. "We have 30 more minutes here, then we'll move to Westminster Abbey," she announced to her group. Emma's parents, David and Helen Patterson, decided to explore a bit. They had traveled so far to see London, and they wanted to make the most of their time. Emma held her mother's hand as they walked through the crowd. "Can we get closer to the guards, Daddy?" Emma asked. "Sure, sweetheart, but we have to be careful not to get in their way," David replied. The family moved through the crowd slowly. There were so many people speaking different languages. Emma heard French children laughing nearby. She saw German tourists taking selfies. She watched Japanese visitors bow politely to the guards. Helen Patterson was taking photos with her phone. She wanted to show Emma's grandparents back home what they were seeing. "Emma, stand here by the fence so I can take your picture with the guard in the background." Emma posed for the photo, smiling brightly. Behind her, James stood perfectly still, his rifle at his side, his face showing no expression. The contrast between the happy little girl and the serious guard made a beautiful picture. The crowd was getting restless. People were pushing more now, trying to get better positions. A group of teenagers was being loud and silly, trying to make the guards react. Some adults told them to be quiet, but the teenagers kept joking around. Sarah Chen continued filming everything with her phone. She loved how the guards never responded to anything. "It's like they're not even human," she said to herself, not meaning to be rude. She was just amazed by their self-control. Emma's father, David, was a former soldier himself. He had served in the Australian Army for 8 years before becoming a teacher. He understood the discipline it took to stand so still for so long. He had great respect for these royal guards. "Those men are very well trained, Emma," he told his daughter. "In the Army, we learn to follow orders exactly. These guards are following their orders to protect the palace." Emma nodded, but she was getting tired of staying in one place. The crowd was big and hot. Adults were talking loudly around her. She felt small and a bit overwhelmed by all the noise and activity. "Mummy, can we go see something else now?" Emma asked. "In a few minutes, darling," Helen replied. She was still taking photos and videos to share with family back home. The Australian tour group was spread out across the palace area. Some people had wandered toward the gift shop. Others were sitting on benches, resting their feet. The tour guide was talking to a few people about their next stop. Emma let go of her mother's hand for just a moment. She saw a pigeon on the ground and wanted to get a closer look. The bird was eating crumbs that someone had dropped. "Look, a birdie," Emma said, taking a few steps toward the pigeon. But when she turned around to show her parents, they were not there. Emma looked left and right. She saw many people, but none of them were her mummy and daddy. The crowd had shifted and new people had filled the space where her parents had been standing. Emma's heart started beating fast. Where were her parents? She was only 7 years old and had never been lost before. Everything looked different when she was alone. The crowd seemed bigger and scarier. The voices around her were in languages she did not understand. "Mummy?" Emma called out, but her small voice was lost in the noise of the crowd. She tried to walk back to where she thought her parents had been, but there were too many people. Tall adults blocked her view. She could not see over or around them. Emma started to feel scared. "Daddy?" She called a bit louder, but still, no one seemed to hear her. Sarah Chen was still filming when she noticed the little girl in the blue dress looking around frantically. At first, Sarah thought the child was just playing a game, but then she saw the worry on Emma's face and realized something was wrong. "Are you okay, little one?" Sarah asked in English, kneeling down to Emma's level. Emma looked at the kind stranger with tears starting in her eyes. "I can't find my mummy and daddy," she said in her Australian accent. Sarah's heart went out to the frightened child. She looked around, trying to spot adults who might be looking for a lost daughter. But there were so many people, and everyone seemed focused on taking photos of the guards. Emma's voice got louder as her fear grew. "Mummy, Daddy, where are you?" she cried out. Several tourists noticed the crying child now. Some tried to help by asking her questions, but Emma was too scared to answer clearly. The different accents and languages confused her more. James Morrison, standing perfectly still at his post, heard the child's cries. He could see from the corner of his eye that a little girl was in distress. But his training told him to stay still, to not get involved, to let others handle the situation. The crowd around Emma grew as more people tried to help. But instead of making things better, this made Emma more frightened. She was surrounded by strangers and her parents were nowhere to be seen. Emma's cries got louder and more desperate. "I want my mummy," she sobbed. James could hear every word. His own daughter's faces flashed in his mind. How would he feel if Lucy or Sophie were lost and scared in a crowd of strangers? His heart started beating faster, but he forced himself to remain still. Sarah Chen kept her phone camera rolling, not sure what else to do. She was capturing what she thought was just another tourist moment, not knowing she was about to film something that would change everything for the little lost girl and the royal guard who was fighting every instinct to help her. James Morrison's mind was racing, but his body remained perfectly still. The little girl's cries were getting louder and more desperate. Every sob felt like a knife in his chest. He was a father himself. He knew exactly how terrified this child must be feeling. The royal guard training echoed in his head like a stern voice. Never break position. Never interact with the public. Never let emotions control your actions. You represent the crown. Your duty comes before everything else. James had heard these words thousands of times over 12 years. They had been drilled into him during months of intense training. Breaking protocol was serious. Guards had been dismissed from service for much less. Some had lost their careers for simply smiling at a tourist or answering a question. But the child's voice cut through all of that training. "Please, somebody help me find my mummy," Emma cried. Her small voice was breaking with fear and exhaustion. James closed his eyes for just a second, which was already more movement than he was supposed to show. He thought about his own daughter Lucy, who was almost the same age as this lost child. What if Lucy were lost in a foreign country, surrounded by strangers who spoke different languages? He thought about Sophie, his 5-year-old, who still had nightmares sometimes and needed her daddy to make her feel safe. What if Sophie were crying for help and no one could comfort her because they were too busy following rules? The crowd around Emma was growing, but it was not helping. People from different countries were trying to communicate with her, but their various accents and languages were making her more confused and scared. A German man knelt down and spoke to her in broken English. "Where is your mama, little girl?" Emma could not understand his thick accent. She shook her head and cried harder. A French woman tried to help by speaking to her in French, thinking maybe the child was French. When Emma did not respond, the woman tried English, but her accent was also difficult for the frightened child to understand. Sarah Chen, still filming, tried to comfort Emma. "It's okay, sweetie. We'll find your parents. Can you tell me what they look like?" Emma tried to answer through her tears. "My daddy has brown hair and he's wearing a blue shirt with a kangaroo on it. My mummy has blonde hair like me." Sarah looked around the crowd trying to spot people matching that description. But there were hundreds of tourists and many of them had brown or blonde hair. James heard every word. The child was Australian. Her parents were probably part of the tour group he had seen earlier. The father in the Sydney Olympics shirt, that must be him. But where was the family now? The rule book in James's mind continued its stern lecture. Personal feelings have no place on duty. You are a soldier first, a father second. The reputation of the Royal Guard depends on your discipline. One moment of weakness can destroy years of honor. But another voice was growing stronger in his head. It was his wife's voice from that morning when she kissed him goodbye. "Have a good day, love. Remember what's really important." What was really important? Following rules or helping a scared child? David, his fellow guard standing nearby, could sense James's internal struggle. David had children too. He knew what James must be feeling. But David also knew the consequences of breaking protocol. Guards had been court-martialed for less serious violations. The crowd was getting more agitated. Some tourists were taking photos of the crying child, which made Sarah Chen angry. "Put your cameras away," she called out. This is a real emergency, not entertainment. Emma's sobs were now echoing off the palace walls. The sound seemed to bounce back louder, making her panic even worse. She was hyperventilating from crying so hard. James's military training kicked in again. He knew the signs of a panic attack. The child was in real distress now, beyond just being lost. She needed immediate comfort or her condition could get worse. An older British woman approached the crowd. "Has anyone called the police?" she asked loudly. "I think someone did," a man replied. "But it might take time with all the traffic." Time. That was what the child did not have. Every second she remained lost and scared was making her condition worse. James could see her little body shaking from where he stood. His own daughter's faces flashed in his mind again. Lucy's bright smile when he came home from work. Sophie's tiny hand in his when they crossed the street. The way both girls looked at him like he was the strongest, safest person in the world. "Daddy protects us," Sophie had said just last week when she was scared of thunder. "Daddy keeps us safe." But what kind of protector was he if he could stand by and watch another man's daughter suffer when he had the power to help? The protocol voice in his head grew louder. "Your family depends on your job. If you lose your position, how will you support Lucy and Sophie? Think about their future, not your feelings." James's hands tightened slightly around his rifle. The movement was so small that no tourist would notice, but David saw it. David knew James well enough to recognize the signs of internal conflict. Emma's crying was attracting attention from palace security now. James could see officers moving through the crowd trying to assess the situation, but they were having trouble reaching the child through all the tourists. The security officers were trained to handle these situations, James told himself. It was their job, not his. He should let them handle it. That was the proper protocol. But the security officers were still 30 feet away, pushing through the thick crowd. They were big men in uniform, which might scare the child even more when they finally reached her. Emma was looking around desperately now, searching every face for someone familiar. Her eyes briefly met James's, and for a moment time seemed to stop. In that instant, James saw his own daughter's face. He saw every child who had ever been lost, scared, and alone. He saw the trust that children placed in adults to keep them safe. The little girl looked at him with hope in her tearful eyes. She had noticed his uniform, his official appearance. Maybe this man could help her find her parents. But James looked straight ahead, his face like stone. He followed his training and showed no reaction. Emma's face fell and she turned away, her hopes crushed. That moment broke something inside James Morrison. He realized that all the rules in the world meant nothing if they stopped him from protecting a child. All the discipline and training in the world meant nothing if they made him ignore his basic human duty to help someone in need. His wife's words echoed again. "Remember what's really important." His daughter's voices joined in. "Daddy protects us. Daddy keeps us safe." And now a new voice, his own conscience. "What kind of man are you if you can stand by and do nothing?" James felt his resolve cracking. Every second that passed was another second of terror for this innocent child. Every moment he remained still was another moment he failed as a human being. The protocol voice made one last desperate attempt. "Think of your career. Think of your future. Think of the consequences." But James Morrison, father of two, protector by nature, guardian by choice, finally found his answer. Some things were more important than protocol. Some things were more important than rules. Some things were more important than his own career. A child's safety was one of those things. James Morrison made his decision. The moment had arrived. James Morrison took a deep breath and made the decision that would change his life forever. He moved. It started small, just a slight turn of his head toward the crying child. Then his shoulders shifted. The tourists nearby gasped. Royal guards were never supposed to move like this. "Oh my God," Sarah Chen whispered, still filming with her phone. "The guard is moving." James lifted his right foot and took one step forward. Then another. The crowd fell completely silent. Even Emma stopped crying for a moment, surprised by what she was seeing. David, his fellow guard, watched in shock but said nothing. He knew that James was ending his career, but he also knew why. David felt proud and terrified for his friend at the same time. James walked slowly toward Emma. With each step, he was breaking another rule, crossing another line that could never be uncrossed. But he felt more right about this decision than he had felt about anything in years. The tourists began pulling out their phones and cameras. This was something they had never seen before. A royal guard abandoning his post to help a child. Sarah Chen kept her camera steady, knowing she was recording something historic. When James reached Emma, he stopped and looked down at her. She stared up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. The tall guard in his bright red uniform and huge black hat must have seemed like a giant to her. James knew that once he spoke to her, there would be no going back. Speaking to tourists was strictly forbidden. But looking at this scared little girl, he realized he had already crossed the point of no return the moment he took his first step. James slowly removed his tall black hat and held it under his arm. The crowd gasped again. Guards never removed their hats during duty. Ever. James knelt down so he was at Emma's eye level. His knees touched the ground, something that would horrify his commanding officers if they saw it. "Hello there, little one," James said in his gentle English accent. His voice was soft and kind, nothing like the stern, silent soldier he was supposed to be. Emma's eyes went wide. The guard was talking to her, and he seemed nice, not scary at all. His eyes were kind, like her daddy's eyes. "Are you lost?" James asked, keeping his voice calm and soothing. Emma nodded, fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. "I can't find my mummy and daddy," she said in her small voice. "That must be very scary," James replied. "But don't worry, we're going to find them together. Can you tell me your name?" "Emma," she whispered. "That's a beautiful name. My daughter has a friend named Emma. I'm James, and I'm going to help you find your parents. Is that okay?" Emma nodded again, feeling a bit braver now. This nice man reminded her of her daddy. He was big and strong, but his voice was gentle. The crowd around them was completely silent now. Hundreds of tourists watched this impossible scene unfold. Royal Guards simply did not do this. Ever. Many people were recording with their phones, understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Can you tell me what your mummy and daddy look like?" James asked Emma. "My daddy has brown hair and he's wearing a blue shirt with a kangaroo on it. My mummy has blonde hair like mine. She's wearing a pink top," James nodded. He remembered seeing that family earlier. They were part of the Australian tour group. He looked around the crowd, searching for anyone matching that description. "Are you from Australia?" he asked Emma. "Yes. We live in Sydney. We came here on a big airplane to see the Queen's house." James smiled. It was the first time he had smiled while on duty in 12 years. "Well, the Queen isn't home today, but I think she would be very happy to know that a nice little girl from Australia came to visit her house." Emma managed a small smile through her tears. The guard was being so kind to her. She felt less scared now. Palace security officers were finally pushing through the crowd, but they stopped when they saw what was happening. They had never seen anything like this either. They spoke quietly into their radios, informing their supervisors of the unprecedented situation. James heard the radio chatter, but he ignored it. Right now, nothing mattered except helping this frightened child find her parents. "Emma, I'm going to stand up now and we're going to look for your parents together. Is that okay? You can hold my hand if you want." Emma nodded eagerly. When James stood up, he was very tall compared to her. But when he offered his hand, she took it without hesitation. His hand was big and warm and made her feel safe. The crowd began to murmur with amazement. A royal guard was holding a child's hand and walking through the crowd. People stepped aside to let them pass, still recording everything with their cameras and phones. "Now, Emma," James said as they walked, "let's look for your parents. Can you see them anywhere?" Emma looked around from her new vantage point next to the tall guard. She was higher up now because she was standing on her toes, and James was helping her see over the crowd. Sarah Chen followed them with her camera, her heart racing with excitement. She knew this video would be incredible, but more than that, she was moved by the guard's kindness. This was real humanity in action. As they walked, James talked to Emma to keep her calm. "Do you know what this hat is called?" he asked, showing her his bearskin hat. "It's very big," Emma said, temporarily distracted from her worry. "It's called a bearskin hat. It's very old-fashioned, but it's part of our uniform. It's quite heavy, too. Why do you wear it? It's tradition. Guards have worn hats like this for hundreds of years. We wear them to look official and important when we protect the palace." Emma was fascinated. "Do you really protect the Queen?" "We help protect the palace and everyone in it. It's a very important job." As they walked through the crowd, people continued taking photos and videos. Some tourists were calling out encouragement. "Good for you," an American woman shouted. "That's what real heroes do." James felt embarrassed by the attention, but he also felt proud. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing exactly what he was meant to do. They had walked about 50 feet when Emma suddenly stopped. "There," she shouted, pointing toward the palace gates. "There's my daddy." James looked in the direction she was pointing. He could see a man with brown hair wearing a blue shirt, frantically searching the crowd. Next to him was a woman with blonde hair and a pink top, looking panicked and scared. "Are you sure that's them?" James asked. "Yes, yes. That's my mommy and daddy." Emma was jumping up and down with excitement now. James began walking toward the couple, Emma's hand still in his. He could see the exact moment when Emma's parents spotted them. The relief and amazement on their faces was something he would never forget. David and Helen Patterson could not believe what they were seeing. Their lost daughter was walking toward them, holding hands with a royal guard who had abandoned his post to help her. This was the moment that would change everything. Not just for Emma and her family, not just for James Morrison, but for everyone watching. This was the moment when humanity won over protocol, when love conquered rules, when doing the right thing became more important than following orders. James Morrison had made his choice and there was no going back. James and Emma walked through the crowd together, her small hand safe in his big one. Every step brought them closer to her parents, but also closer to whatever consequences James would face for his actions. The crowd parted like water as they moved forward. Tourists whispered in amazement. Children pointed with wonder. Adults held their phones high, capturing every moment of this unprecedented scene. "Is that really them?" James asked Emma as they got closer to the couple. "Yes, that's my daddy, and that's my mummy." Emma was practically bouncing with excitement now, her fear completely replaced by joy. David Patterson spotted them first. He had been searching frantically for 10 minutes, his heart pounding with every second that passed without finding his daughter. When he saw Emma walking hand in hand with the royal guard, he could barely believe his eyes. "Helen," he called to his wife.
"Helen, there she is."
Helen Patterson turned and saw the most amazing sight of her life. Her little girl, who had been lost and scared, was now walking confidently beside one of the famous royal guards. The guard had removed his tall hat and was leaning down to listen to something Emma was saying. Both parents started running toward their daughter, pushing through the crowd of tourists. Other people stepped aside, understanding that this was a moment of pure family reunion. "Emma," Helen cried out, her voice breaking with relief and emotion. Emma heard her mother's voice and let go of James's hand. She ran the last few steps into her parents' arms. All three of them hugged tightly, crying with happiness and relief. James stood back and watched the reunion, feeling a warmth in his chest that made all the trouble he was about to face seem worth it. This was what mattered. This was what being human was all about. David Patterson looked up at James with tears in his eyes. As a former soldier himself, he understood exactly what this man had just done. He had broken every rule, risked his entire career just to help a lost child. "Thank you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." Helen was still hugging Emma tightly, but she looked up at James too. "How can we ever thank you enough? You saved our little girl." James felt embarrassed by their gratitude. "Any parent would have done the same," he said quietly. "No," David said firmly, standing up and extending his hand. "Not everyone would have risked everything to help a stranger's child. You're a hero." James shook David's hand. "I'm just a father," he said simply. Emma looked up at James from her mother's arms. "Thank you for helping me find my mummy and daddy," she said in her sweet voice. "You're very welcome, Emma. I'm so glad you're safe now." The crowd around them had grown even larger. People were clapping and cheering. Sarah Chen was still filming everything, tears streaming down her own face as she watched the emotional reunion. Palace security officers were now surrounding the scene, but they seemed unsure of what to do. This situation was not covered in any of their training manuals. The guard had broken protocol, but he had done it for the most noble reason possible. Captain Williams, James's commanding officer, was pushing through the crowd. James saw him coming and felt his stomach drop. Captain Williams was a strict man who followed every rule to the letter. James knew he was in serious trouble. "Sergeant Morrison," Captain Williams called out in his stern voice. James straightened up immediately, his military training taking over. "Yes, sir." "What is the meaning of this?" Captain Williams demanded, though he kept his voice lower than usual because of all the tourists watching. "Sir, the child was lost and in distress. I felt I had to help." Captain Williams looked around at the crowd of tourists, all recording with their phones. He realized that whatever happened next would be watched by thousands, maybe millions of people around the world. "We'll discuss this later, Sergeant. Return to your post immediately," James nodded. Yes, sir. He turned back to Emma and her family one more time. Emma had been watching this exchange with worry. Even though she was only 7, she could tell that the nice guard was in trouble because he had helped her. Are you in trouble because you helped me? Emma asked, her voice small and concerned. James knelt down one last time and smiled at her. Don't you worry about that, Emma. The most important thing is that you're safe with your mummy and daddy now. But I don't want you to be in trouble, Emma said, her eyes filling with tears again. James's heart melted. This brave little girl was worried about him, even after everything she had been through. Sometimes, Emma, grown-ups have to make difficult choices. I chose to help you because it was the right thing to do, and I would make the same choice again. David Patterson stepped forward. Officer, he said to Captain Williams, this man is a hero. He helped our lost daughter when she was scared and alone. Surely that counts for something. Captain Williams looked uncomfortable with all the attention. Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this is a military matter. Sergeant Morrison knew the rules when he broke them. Helen Patterson was getting angry now. Rules? What about being human? What about helping children? Are your rules more important than that? The crowd was listening to every word. People began murmuring agreement with Helen. Some started calling out support for James. The guard did the right thing. Someone shouted, "He's a hero," called another voice. "Leave him alone," yelled a third tourist. Captain Williams realized the situation was getting out of control. With hundreds of people watching and recording, he needed to handle this carefully. Everyone please step back, he announced to the crowd. Let us handle this situation properly. James stood up and put his bearskin hat back on his head. He looked at Emma one more time and gave her a small wave. She waved back, still looking worried about her new friend. Emma, James said softly, remember to always stay close to your mummy and daddy when you're in big crowds, okay? I will, Emma promised. Will I see you again? I hope so, James replied, though he honestly was not sure what would happen to him now. Sarah Chen stepped forward, still holding her phone. Excuse me, she said to James. I filmed everything that just happened. The whole world is going to see how kind and brave you are. James looked surprised. He had not really thought about the fact that people were recording everything. I just did what felt right, he said. And that's exactly why this is so special, Sarah replied. Captain Williams was getting impatient. Sergeant Morrison, return to your post now. We'll discuss this in my office after your shift. James nodded and began walking back toward the palace gates. The crowd parted to let him through and people clapped as he passed. Some reached out to pat him on the shoulder or shake his hand. Emma watched him go, still holding her parents' hands tightly. I hope he doesn't get in too much trouble, she whispered to her mother. I hope so too, sweetheart, Helen replied. As James took his position back at the palace gates, he tried to return to his stoic, motionless stance. But everything felt different now. The tourists looked at him differently. His fellow guards looked at him differently. He felt different. For 12 years he had been the perfect soldier, following every rule exactly. But in those 20 minutes helping Emma, he had been the person he was meant to be. He had been a protector, a helper, a father figure to a child in need. Whatever happened next, James Morrison knew he had done the right thing. And as he stood at his post, watching Emma and her family rejoin their tour group, he felt more pride than he had ever felt in his military career. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the magic of what had just happened lingered in the air. People were already sharing videos and photos online. The story was spreading across social media platforms around the world. James Morrison had no idea that his simple act of kindness was about to make him famous. He only knew that somewhere in the crowd a little girl named Emma was safe with her parents, and that was all that mattered. The reunion between Emma and her parents was like something from a movie. David Patterson held his daughter close, feeling her small body against his chest. He had been terrified that something terrible might happen to her in a foreign country where they did not know anyone. Helen Patterson could not stop crying with relief. For those 20 minutes when Emma was missing, she had imagined every horrible possibility. Now her little girl was safe in her arms, thanks to a stranger who had risked everything to help. Emma was happy to be back with her parents, but she kept looking over at James, who had returned to his post by the palace gates. She was worried about her new friend who had been so kind to her. Mummy, why was that captain man angry at the nice guard? Emma asked. Helen did not know how to explain the complicated rules of the Royal Guard to a 7-year-old. Sometimes grown-ups have rules at work, sweetheart. But the guard knew that helping you was more important than following those rules. David Patterson was still shaking from the experience. As a former soldier, he understood military discipline better than most people. He knew that James had just committed a serious breach of protocol. In the Army, such actions could result in court-martial, demotion, or dismissal. But as a father, David also understood that James had done the only thing any decent human being could do. When faced with a choice between rules and helping a frightened child, James had chosen compassion. "That man is a real hero," David said to his wife and daughter. He put his job on the line to help a stranger's child. The Australian tour group was gathering nearby, preparing to leave for their next destination. The tour guide, Mary, had heard about what happened and came over to check on the family. "Is Emma all right?" Mary asked with concern. "I heard she got lost in the crowd." "She's fine now," Helen replied. "One of the Royal Guards helped her find us." Mary looked surprised. "A Royal Guard helped her, but they're not supposed to move or talk during their duty." "That's what made it so special," David explained. "The guard broke all the rules to help our daughter. He risked his career for a child he didn't even know." Mary was amazed. In all her years as a London tour guide, she had never heard of anything like this happening. The Royal Guards were famous for never breaking their discipline, no matter what happened around them. Sarah Chen was still in the crowd, reviewing the video she had just recorded on her phone. She could hardly believe what she had captured. The footage showed everything. Emma crying and lost, James making the decision to help her, the touching moment when he knelt down to her level, their walk through the crowd hand in hand, and the emotional reunion with her parents. Sarah knew this video was special. It showed something pure and beautiful about human nature. In a world full of bad news and negative stories, this was a reminder that there were still good people who would do the right thing, even when it cost them personally. She looked around at the other tourists who had witnessed the event. Everyone seemed moved by what they had seen. People were talking quietly among themselves, sharing their own photos and videos of the incident. An elderly British woman approached Sarah. "Excuse me, dear, did you film what just happened with the guard and the little girl?" "Yes, I did," Sarah replied. "That was the most beautiful thing I've seen in years," the woman said with tears in her eyes. "That young man is a credit to his uniform. I do hope he doesn't get in trouble for doing the right thing." Sarah nodded in agreement. "I hope so too. The world needs more people like him." Meanwhile, James had returned to his position at the palace gates, but everything felt different now. The tourists looked at him with new respect and admiration. Instead of trying to make him laugh or break his composure, people were taking respectful photos and pointing him out to their children as an example of kindness. A young boy, about Emma's age, approached the fence with his parents. The boy waved at James, and for just a moment, James allowed himself a small nod in return. His commanding officer was no longer watching, and the small gesture made the boy smile with delight. David, his fellow guard, was proud of what James had done, but he was also worried about his friend. He knew that Captain Williams was a strict disciplinarian who did not tolerate rule-breaking, no matter what the reason. During a brief moment when no tourists were nearby, David whispered to James, "Are you all right, mate?" "I'm fine," James replied quietly. "Whatever happens, I'm fine." "You did the right thing," David said. "Anyone with a heart would have done the same." James appreciated his friend's support, but he knew that not everyone would see it that way. The military valued order, discipline, and following commands above all else. Personal feelings and individual judgment were not supposed to influence a soldier's actions. Emma and her family were preparing to leave with their tour group, but Emma did not want to go. She wanted to thank James one more time and make sure he was okay. "Can we go say goodbye to the nice guard?" Emma asked her parents. David and Helen exchanged glances. They wanted to thank James again too, but they did not want to cause him any more trouble with his superiors. "I don't think we should bother him while he's working, sweetheart," Helen said gently. But Emma was determined. She had been raised to always say thank you when someone helped her, and this man had helped her more than anyone ever had before. Emma slipped away from her parents and ran toward the palace gates before they could stop her. She stood right in front of James and looked up at him with her big blue eyes. "Thank you for helping me," she said in her clear, sweet voice. "You're the nicest soldier in the whole world." James looked down at her, and despite all his training, he could not help but smile. This brave little girl had such a big heart and so much courage. "You're very welcome, Emma," he said softly. "Be safe on the rest of your trip to London." "I will. And I'll never forget you," Emma promised. David and Helen Patterson hurried over to collect their daughter, but they were not angry with her. They understood why she had needed to say goodbye properly. "Officer," David said to James, using the respectful tone one soldier uses with another, "I want you to know that what you did today will never be forgotten by our family. If you ever come to Australia, you have a place to stay in Sydney." Helen nodded in agreement. "Our daughter could have been seriously hurt or worse if you hadn't helped her. You're an angel." James felt embarrassed by their praise. "I just did what any father would do." "No," David said firmly. "You did what a hero would do. There's a difference." The tour guide was calling for the group to board the bus for their next destination. Emma hugged both her parents tightly, then looked back at James one more time. "I hope you don't get in trouble," she called out as her family walked away. "Don't worry about me," James called back. "Just remember to stay close to your mummy and daddy." Emma waved until the bus pulled away, and James could no longer see her. The crowd around the palace had thinned out considerably, but people were still talking about what they had witnessed. James knew that his shift would end in 2 hours, and then he would have to face Captain Williams in his office. He had no idea what would happen to him. He might be demoted, suspended, or even discharged from service. But as he stood at his post, watching tourists take photos and seeing the respect in their eyes, James Morrison felt something he had not felt in years. He felt proud of who he was, not just as a soldier but as a human being. For 20 minutes he had been exactly the person he wanted to be. He had been a protector, a helper, a father figure to a child in need. Whatever consequences he faced, those 20 minutes had been worth it. Emma Patterson was safe with her family, and that was all that mattered. As the afternoon wore on, James had no idea that the video of his actions was already spreading across the internet like wildfire. By evening, millions of people around the world would know his name and his story. But right now, in this moment, he was simply a soldier doing his duty, standing guard at the palace with the warm feeling in his heart that comes from knowing you have done the right thing, no matter what it cost you. Sarah Chen sat in her hotel room that evening, staring at her phone screen in disbelief. The video she had recorded of James helping Emma had been viewed over 50,000 times in just 3 hours. Comments were pouring in from all over the world. "This made me cry happy." "Tears," wrote someone from Canada. "This is what real heroes look like," commented a person from Germany. "Faith in humanity restored," posted a user from Japan. Sarah had uploaded the video to her social media accounts with the caption, "Royal Guard breaks protocol to help lost child at Buckingham Palace. This is what courage and compassion look like." She never expected it to spread so quickly. Her phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. People were sharing the video on every social platform. News websites were starting to pick up the story. By 10 o'clock that night, the hashtag #HumanityOverProtocol was trending on Twitter. The video had been shared over 100,000 times and viewed by more than 2 million people. Sarah felt a responsibility to tell the story properly. She wanted people to understand how brave James had been, and how scared little Emma had looked before he helped her. She started writing a longer post to go with the video. "Today I witnessed something extraordinary at Buckingham Palace," she wrote. "A royal guard named James broke every rule in the book to help a lost Australian girl named Emma find her parents. He risked his career, his reputation, and his future to comfort a frightened child. This is what real heroism looks like. Not the kind with capes and superpowers, but the kind that happens when ordinary people choose compassion over rules." Meanwhile, Emma Patterson was having dinner with her parents at their London hotel. She kept talking about the nice guard who had helped her. "Do you think he got in trouble, Daddy?" Emma asked for the 10th time that evening. I don't know, sweetheart, David replied honestly. But I hope not. He did the right thing. Helen Patterson was scrolling through her phone when she gasped. David, look at this. Someone filmed what happened today. She showed him Sarah Chen's video. David watched in amazement as he saw the whole incident from a different angle. He could see how scared Emma had looked, and how gently James had treated her. This is incredible, David said. Look at all these comments. People all over the world are calling him a hero. Emma climbed onto her father's lap to watch the video. That's me, she said excitedly when she saw herself on the screen. And that's the nice guard. Helen was reading the comments aloud. Listen to this one. I'm a police officer in New York, and I would be proud to serve alongside this royal guard. He showed what true service means. David found another comment that moved him. I'm a military veteran, and what this soldier did takes more courage than following orders. He chose humanity over hierarchy. The video was being shared by news channels, celebrities, and ordinary people who were touched by the story. By midnight London time, it had reached 10 million views. At Buckingham Palace, the evening shift of guards had heard about what happened. Word spread quickly through the military ranks. Some of the older officers were worried about the breach of protocol, but most of the younger soldiers were proud of James. Corporal Williams, one of James's friends, found him during the evening break. Mate, you're all over the internet, he said, showing James his phone. James looked at the screen and saw himself kneeling down to talk to Emma. He felt strange seeing himself from an outside perspective. This is getting out of hand, he said quietly. Are you kidding? You're a hero. Look at these comments. People are saying you should get a medal, not a punishment. James shook his head. I just helped a lost kid. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, James, that's the point. Not everyone would have risked their career to help a stranger's child. That's what makes you special. Captain Williams had seen the video too. He was sitting in his office late that evening, preparing for his meeting with James the next morning. The situation had become much more complicated than he had expected. His phone had been ringing all day. Reporters wanted comments. Senior officers were asking questions. The public relations department at the palace was trying to figure out how to respond to all the attention. Captain Williams was a military man who believed in rules and discipline. But he was also human. Watching the video, seeing the fear in that little girl's eyes and the gentleness in James's actions, he found himself conflicted. The rules were clear. James had abandoned his post and broken protocol. But the result was that a lost child was safely reunited with her parents. How do you punish someone for doing something so obviously, right? Meanwhile, in Australia, Emma's grandparents were watching the news coverage of their granddaughter's adventure. The story had reached Australian television, and Emma had become a little celebrity in her home country. Look, Emma's famous, her grandmother said, calling David and Helen in London. They're showing the video on Channel 7. Our little Emma is on TV. David laughed. She's enjoying all the attention. She keeps asking about her guard and whether he's in trouble. Well, he shouldn't be in trouble, Emma's grandfather said firmly. He's a hero. If it weren't for him, who knows what could have happened to our Emma in that crowd. Back in London, news reporters were starting to gather outside Buckingham Palace. They wanted to interview James, but palace security was keeping them away. The royal guard duty was continuing as normal, but there was definitely more attention than usual. James finished his evening shift and went home to his wife and daughters. Lucy and Sophie were already asleep, but his wife Margaret was waiting up for him. James, sit down, she said seriously. We need to talk about what happened today. James felt his stomach drop. He'd been so focused on the immediate consequences at work that he had not thought about how this might affect his family. I saw the video, Margaret continued. Everyone I know has sent it to me. You're all over social media. James braced himself for her anger or disappointment. Instead, Margaret threw her arms around him and hugged him tightly. I am so proud of you, she whispered in his ear. So incredibly proud. James felt relief wash over him. You're not angry that I might lose my job? Angry? James, you did what any good father would do. You helped a scared child. If you lost your job for that, it would be their loss, not ours. Margaret showed him her phone. Look at all these messages from people who know us. Everyone is so proud of you. Lucy and Sophie are going to be so excited when they find out their daddy is famous for being a hero. James felt overwhelmed by all the attention. I just did what felt right in the moment, and that's exactly why I'm proud of you. When it mattered most, you chose to be human instead of just a soldier. They stayed up late that night reading comments and messages from around the world. People were sharing their own stories of times when they had been helped by strangers. Parents were talking about their worst fears of losing a child in a crowd. Military families were expressing support for James's actions. One comment particularly touched them. It was from a woman in America. My daughter got lost at Disneyland when she was Emma's age. A security guard helped us find her, and I will never forget his kindness. Thank you for reminding the world that there are still good people who will help children in need. James went to bed that night not knowing what the next day would bring. Would he be punished for breaking protocol? Would he lose the job he had worked so hard to earn? Would his family suffer because of his decision? But as he lay in the dark, thinking about Emma's small hand in his and the relief on her parents' faces, James Morrison knew he had made the right choice. Some things were more important than rules. Some things were more important than jobs. Some things were more important than his own security. A child's safety was one of those things, and now, thanks to a video recorded by a tourist from Singapore, the whole world was about to learn what James Morrison had always known, that being human is more important than following orders, and that real heroes are the people who choose compassion when it would be easier to look the other way. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight James Morrison slept peacefully, knowing he had done the right thing. James Morrison woke up the next morning to find his life completely changed. His phone was buzzing with messages, and his wife Margaret was already downstairs watching the morning news. "James," she called up the stairs. "You need to see this." James came downstairs to find his story on BBC Morning News. The reporter was standing outside Buckingham Palace, telling the world about the royal guard who had broken protocol to help a lost child. The video has now been viewed over 50 million times worldwide, the reporter said. Social media users are calling Sergeant James Morrison a hero and demanding that he be commended rather than punished for his actions. Lucy and Sophie were eating breakfast, completely unaware that their father was famous. Margaret had decided to wait until James came home before telling them what had happened. "Daddy," Sophie ran to hug him. "Why is the TV talking about your work?" James knelt down to his daughter's level, just as he had done with Emma the day before. "Well, yesterday I helped a little girl who was lost. Someone filmed it and now people are talking about it." "You helped a lost little girl?" Lucy asked with wide eyes. "Like a superhero?" James smiled. "Not like a superhero, sweetheart. Just like a daddy. The little girl couldn't find her mummy and daddy, so I helped her look for them." "That's what you would do for us if we got lost," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "That's exactly right," James replied, feeling proud that his daughters understood. Margaret showed James her phone. The notifications hadn't stopped all night. News channels from around the world were asking for interviews. Talk shows wanted him as a guest. Publishers were asking if he wanted to write a book about his experience. "This is crazy," James said, scrolling through the messages. "I just helped one little girl. I don't understand why everyone is making such a big deal about it." "Because," Margaret explained, "in a world where people often ignore others in need, you chose to help. You chose to risk everything for a stranger's child. That's rare, James. That's special." James's phone rang. It was Captain Williams, Sergeant Morrison. "Report to my office at 9 o'clock sharp." "Yes, sir," James replied, his stomach tightening with worry. After breakfast, James got dressed in his uniform and prepared to face whatever consequences awaited him. Margaret kissed him goodbye. "Whatever happens," she said, "remember that you did the right thing. Lucy, Sophie, and I will always be proud of you." When James arrived at Buckingham Palace, he was surprised to see news vans and reporters outside the gates. They called out to him as he walked past, but palace security kept them at a distance. "Sergeant Morrison, how does it feel to be a hero? Are you worried about being punished? Would you do it again?" James ignored the questions and went inside to report to Captain Williams's office. Captain Williams was sitting behind his desk with several senior officers. James recognized Colonel Thompson, the commanding officer of all the Royal Guards, and Major Richards from the Palace Administrative Office. "Sergeant Morrison, please sit down," Captain Williams said. James sat at attention, prepared for the worst. I suppose you know why you're here, Colonel Thompson began. Yes, sir. I broke protocol yesterday. You certainly did, the colonel replied. You abandoned your post, interacted with tourists, removed your ceremonial hat, and knelt on the ground in full uniform. James felt his career slipping away. Yes, sir. I take full responsibility for my actions. Why did you do it? Major Richards asked. James thought carefully about his answer. Sir, I saw a child in distress. She was lost, scared, and crying. As a father, I couldn't stand by and do nothing. I made a choice to help her, knowing it would have consequences. Colonel Thompson leaned back in his chair. Sergeant Morrison, in 30 years of military service, I've never seen anything like what happened yesterday. The palace has been flooded with calls and emails. People from around the world are demanding that you be rewarded, not punished. James looked up, surprised. Sir? The Prime Minister's office called this morning, Major Richards added. They want to know how we plan to handle this situation. The story has gone global and public opinion is overwhelmingly in your favor. Captain Williams opened a file on his desk. We've received over 10,000 emails in the past 18 hours. I'll read you a few. He cleared his throat and began. From a mother in Canada. This man represents the best of humanity. If all soldiers showed this kind of compassion, the world would be a better place. From a veteran in America. I served 30 years in the military, and this Royal Guard showed true courage by putting human need above regulations. From a teacher in Germany. I'm showing this video to my students as an example of moral courage. James couldn't believe what he was hearing. Colonel Thompson stood up and walked to the window. Sergeant Morrison, what you did yesterday put us in a very difficult position. On one hand, you violated clear protocols. On the other hand, you demonstrated exactly the kind of character and compassion that the Royal Guard should represent. We've been discussing this situation all morning, Major Richards said, with senior palace officials, with government representatives, and with public relations experts. James waited, his heart pounding. Here's what we've decided, Colonel Thompson announced. Rather than punishment, you will receive a commendation for exceptional service and humanitarian action. Your actions yesterday demonstrated the highest ideals of the Royal Guard, protection of the innocent and service to others. James couldn't speak. He had expected to be dismissed from service, not commended. Furthermore, Major Richards continued, we're implementing new guidelines for emergency situations involving children. Guards will now have discretion to break protocol when necessary to ensure child safety. Your actions have actually improved our service, Captain Williams added. The public's respect for the Royal Guard has increased dramatically because of what you did. Colonel Thompson returned to his desk. There is one condition, however. You'll need to participate in a press conference this afternoon to address the media attention. The palace wants to use this opportunity to show the human side of the Royal Guard. James finally found his voice. Sir, I'm honored by this response, but I still believe any decent person would have done what I did. That's exactly the point, Sergeant, Colonel Thompson replied. The fact that you don't see yourself as special is what makes you special. Later that day, James stood before a room full of reporters and cameras. He was nervous but determined to handle the situation with dignity. Ladies and gentlemen, the palace spokesperson began, we're here to address the events of yesterday involving Sergeant James Morrison of Her Majesty's Royal Guard. The spokesperson explained the palace's decision to commend James rather than punish him, and announced the new guidelines for emergency situations. Then it was James's turn to speak. Thank you all for coming, he began. I want to be clear about something. I didn't do anything extraordinary yesterday. I simply helped a scared child find her parents. Any parent in that situation would have done the same thing. A reporter raised her hand. Sergeant Morrison, you risked your career to help a stranger's child. How do you explain that? James thought about Emma's frightened face and her parents' relief. When you see a child in distress, you don't think about rules or consequences. You think about getting that child to safety. That little girl could have been my daughter, or your daughter, or anyone's daughter. She needed help, and I was in a position to help her. Another reporter asked, Do you regret breaking protocol? I regret that a child was lost and scared, James replied. But I don't regret helping her find her parents. I would make the same choice again. Have you heard from the family since yesterday? James smiled. Emma's parents sent me a beautiful thank you note this morning. Emma drew me a picture of myself in my red uniform with the words "My Hero" written at the bottom. That means more to me than any medal ever could. The press conference ended with overwhelming positive coverage. That evening, James was invited to appear on several television shows, but he declined most of them. He wanted to return to his normal life as much as possible. 3 weeks later, James received a special visitor at Buckingham Palace. Emma Patterson and her parents had returned to London specifically to see him. "James!" Emma cried, running to hug him. He was off duty, so he was able to hug her back properly. "Hello, Emma. How was the rest of your trip to London?" "It was brilliant, but I kept telling everyone about my friend the guard who helped me." David and Helen Patterson thanked James again for what he had done. They had brought him a gift, a photo album filled with pictures from their London trip, including several photos of James and Emma together on that day. "You gave us the greatest gift possible," Helen said. "You brought our daughter back to us safely. We'll never forget what you did." James looked through the photo album with Emma, listening as she told him about all the other places they had visited in London. "The Tower of London was scary," Emma said, "but not as scary as being lost. I'm glad you were there to help me." "I'm glad I was there too," James replied. 6 months later, James Morrison was still serving as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace. The video of him helping Emma had been viewed over 100 million times and had been translated into dozens of languages.